To understand what science is, you need to also understand what science isn't. Now, these non-sciences, these pseudosciences, which are often presented as legitimate sciences, they are considered pseudo because they lack key features of science, which are empiricism, systematicity, and repeatability. Now, there's a lot of different kinds out there, and I'd like to mention a few of them in this video, but before we get to any of that, I should explain why we're even talking about this, because pseudosciences are, by their definition, a waste of time. You know, it's not helpful. It's not going to give us the answers that we want. But we should talk about them for two reasons. They do harm in two ways. So the first way is that they mislead people. You know, people spend their time, they spend their money, they spend their effort on fruitless pursuits. Maybe they buy into some scam that some celebrity has started, for example, and they end up spending all their life savings on it. That's heartbreaking. A lot of pseudosciences can lead people to make some pretty bad choices too regarding their personal health and well-being. So that's one way that pseudosciences can harm people. The other big way is that they make legitimate science look bad. You know, they devalue science. And because there's so much pseudoscience out there and so many people have been burned by it, logically, this has left a bad taste in their mouth. So there's a lot of anti-scientific sentiment nowadays, and I imagine most of it is due to this kind of stuff. But you can see this quite clearly in our modern, like, anti-vaxxers and climate change deniers and people like those. So in the rest of this video, I just want to highlight a few that maybe you've been burned by, maybe you haven't, but these have been profoundly influential, and many of them continue to be so. So first of all, there's Feng Shui, which can also be referred to as Chinese geomancy. This has been around forever. You know, this has been developed in ancient times, and the goal of Feng Shui is to maximize the qi, or ki, of a human-built environment. So you're altering this human-built environment in order to get the greatest benefit from this ki, which is a force that is believed to permeate everything, linking the individual to their surrounding. And having good ki is thought to lead to health and longevity. So people who practice Feng Shui, they're not going to say that, you know, rearranging your bedroom or anything like that's going to have any massive impact. But what they're trying to say is that if you pay attention to these invisible forces, you can align yourself within them, and that will lead to health benefits. Vague health benefits, of course, but health benefits of some kind. Something that's kind of similar is aromatherapy, which is the use of plant materials and aromatic plant oils, like I'm sure you've heard of essential oils, to try to alter a person's mood or increase their well-being. Once again, it's fairly vague as to what the exact effects of a lot of these things are. And it's very conceptually similar to a lot of herbal remedies that you can find out there. Now, supporters of aromatherapy argue that it can be useful when it comes to reducing pain and anxiety. It can also help to enhance memory, produce relaxation, prevent hair loss, and so on. There's a long list of claims as to what aromatherapy can do. But we've done the research, and we've found some evidence that shows that it can help to improve your general well-being. Like, it can make you happier, it can make you more optimistic, maybe even have a better, you know, physical well-being. But no scientific evidence has ever been produced that shows that it can treat or prevent anything. In fact, aromatherapy, certain, you know, chemical substances that you use in aromatherapy can actually produce medical problems. Like essential oils can actually be a skin irritant, and they're often made of toxic substances. So if they're misused, it can be very problematic. Another problem that we unfortunately see is that a lot of these plants that are used in aromatherapy and the oils that they produce, they have been treated with pesticides. So those pesticides will persist in the chemical and then it will be inhaled by you. So you can imagine how harmful that could be. Another kind of pseudoscience out there is urine therapy, which involves drinking your own pee for health benefits. I think the less that's said about this, the better. We should just move on. Then we have traditional Chinese medicine. Once again, this is something that's been around since ancient times. The basic idea here is that you are trying to restore balance in your body by ingesting certain kinds of substances. So it's the concept of the yin-yang on like a larger scale. And there's a lot of different practices that are used in traditional Chinese medicine, like acupuncture, moxibustion, gua sha, and so on. This tradition has been around for a long, long time, and there's tons of variation. It also involves the use of various animal and herbal products, such as ginseng, cinnamon, bear bile, bird's nest, and from a particular kind of bird, and so on. But while a lot of this stuff might seem harmless, when you look closer and you see how these kinds of things are produced, it can be rather upsetting in some cases. Like the use of animal products in these traditions has led to poaching, maltreatment of animals, and the endangerment of various species. Like black bears, for example. Asian black bears, they're even today, like right now, it's quite common for them to be kept in what are called crush cages, which, as you can imagine, are very compacted, and fitted with a catheter in order to constantly drain their bile, which is then processed and sold. This bile is thought to treat a wide variety of ailments, such as hemorrhoids, sore throat, epilepsy, hangovers, and the list goes on. Then there's what's happened to the rhinos. Rhinoceros population has dropped 90% in the last 40 years because of poachers. And a lot of these rhino horns that are poached are sold on, to people who practice these kinds of treatments. Their horns are thought to be an aphrodisiac, or some have claimed it can actually be a cure for cancer. So obviously some of these traditions, they're doing a lot of bad stuff, but they can also be harmful to the individual who practices them. Like a lot of traditional medicines are toxic. It's quite common, not as much nowadays, but it was quite common in the past for individuals to use galena, which is a lead ore, when it comes to treating various kinds of issues. But now that we have well documented how it can affect your development and behavior, they still, a lot of these individuals still use it to an extent. They just don't talk about it as much. And that's kind of how this has gone. As science has started to shine light on a lot of these traditions and the assumptions that they have and the consequences that can follow, what's generally happened is that it's just gone underground to a large extent. Another example of how these traditions can be harmful is Asiatic toads. They have like a substance they produce. I don't think I can pronounce it correctly. It's bufadienolide, and this is ingested for various reasons, one of which is it's helps with erection. So if you see something on a traditional Chinese market that's like supposed to improve your erection, give you like a prolonged sexual experience, it might come from this substance. But this has been shown to actually cause heart problems in a lot of individuals. So there is a risk. And then other practices can actually lead to permanent health concerns. Like one form of acupuncture is called cupping. This is where you put like a glass cup on somebody's skin and you produce a vacuum inside so that it sucks on the person's skin. And this will produce a hickey, as you can imagine. But those hickeys typically are going to fade away, but for certain individuals, they can cause persistent skin discoloration, scars, burns, infections, and may worsen the effects of eczema and psoriasis. But the most common, or I should say the most serious consequence of these traditional treatments is that it will delay you when it comes to seeking a more effective medical solution. Another pseudoscience that's still around and affecting us today is intelligent design. This is the belief that a thinking, rational being purposefully created everything that exists in nature, including humans. Major argument for this is that evolution cannot explain the complexity and the diversity of life on Earth. But this is a relatively new pseudoscience, in fact. The belief in this, divine being creating existence has obviously been around for a long time. But presenting this as a legitimate science, that's a relatively new thing. Evolution was not really a controversy in the United States until around the 1920s, when fundamentalist Christians began teaching intelligent design and effectively got the teaching of evolution banned until around the 1960s. So the effects of those fundamentalists are still influencing us today. So proponents of intelligent design like to point to things that science cannot explain well enough, such as the origin of the universe. So what they basically do is they say, if you can't explain this, then why should we listen to you? This is what we call an argument from ignorance. Just because we don't know everything, that doesn't mean we know nothing. But that's kind of what they're saying here. They're kind of saying, if you can't explain everything, then don't explain anything. But critics of intelligent design, scientists who fight against this pseudoscience, they'll often point out all the times where people believe that something couldn't be explained, but later was. It wasn't too long ago that people thought the Earth was the center of the universe, that the Earth was just a few thousand years old, and so on. But science has come out to show, using advancements in methodology and technology, that these things just don't hold up. So we're always finding new ways to learn about the universe. Another common argument amongst supporters of intelligent design is that certain things in nature appear to be too complex or too well suited to human life for evolution to explain. Like the human eye. A lot of people like to point at how complex the human eye is and how if any particular feature was missing, the entire system would not work. But this is just fundamentally false. There are a wide range of eyes in the animal kingdom, and they have various levels of complexity, and you can see how they kind of build on each other. If a feature was missing of our human eye, the eye would still be able to function. Obviously not as well, but you would still be able to detect light and be able to recognize various things if some of these features happened to be missing. Another one is bananas. A lot of intelligent design people, they like to talk about how nutritional and how convenient, it even comes in its own wrapper. They like to talk about bananas. But what they completely fail to recognize is that the bananas they're talking about were not made by nature. Humans, through the process of selective breeding, which is kind of like an artificial form of evolution, humans have created those bananas. So yeah, they fit human needs perfectly because humans made them to fit perfectly. Like, they just completely leave that part out. Another big thing that they don't tend to talk about are all the imperfections. So the human body does have a lot of redundancies, a lot of baggage that just doesn't really help. We call these things spandrels, you know, these unhelpful byproducts of evolution. Like, do you know what an appendix is? An appendix is a part of your body that serves only one function. So if you don't know what that is, just think about it for a second. Like, what might this appendix do? Well, the answer is the only thing it can do is kill you. Like, that's literally it. Like, for some people, that appendix will become inflamed, it will rupture, and they will die. But if they have the appendix removed, there seems to be no consequences whatsoever. So maybe in our evolutionary past, maybe the appendix was useful, but nowadays it's just an unfortunate holdover from the process of evolution. I don't even want to begin about how the brain is backwards and the eye is backwards, and there's a lot of inefficiencies in human design. Then there's Dianetics, which is practiced by Scientologists. This is a very controversial pseudoscience because Scientology has come under some really bad light lately. You know, a lot of people have started to compare Scientology to various like cults and things like that. But if you don't know about Scientology, it is a religion, an organization that was created by a science fiction writer named L. Ron Hubbard. And Dianetics refers to this set of ideas and practices regarding the metaphysical relationship between the mind and the body. Now, in modern science, we have found a connection between these, but in Dianetics, they talk about how the mind is like this immaterial thing that can be influenced through thought. So in order to influence your mind, you'll have to go through what they call an audit in order to eliminate harmful memories, which they refer to as engrams. I don't make this stuff up, but a lot of these practices, they may actually be helpful for some individuals, because while there isn't any empirical support for these procedures, some individuals during the process, they do undergo hypnosis to a certain extent, and hypnosis has been well documented to help alter memories. Here's one that you may have not heard of though. It's called facilitated communication. It was developed in 1960 as a method for assisting people with severe communication disability. What they would do is they would hold the person's hand that was trying to communicate and help them to like push buttons on a keyboard or help them to write something on a piece of paper. So they're literally just facilitating that communication. Well, at least that's what they thought they were doing. What they were actually doing was communicating themselves. So it was the facilitator that was communicating, not the person who needed the help. And they discovered this by doing various scientific tests. So what they basically did was they would ask a question that only the facilitator could answer correctly. And they learned that, you know, when they did answer the correctly, they learned what was actually going on. And the cause of this, because the facilitators actually thought they were helping, the cause of this is something called the ideomotor effect. This refers to how you can handle a device without realizing you're affecting the outcome. So the same thing occurs when you use like a divining rod, you know, like you just hold a stick and it waves around and points at things. This is also caused by the ideomotor effect. If you've ever heard of a Ouija board before, same idea. So it's just people don't realize they're having an influence when they definitely are. And that's kind of a sad story because, as I mentioned, these facilitators, they were trying to help. They wanted to help, and they thought they were helping, but they weren't. So it was very disappointing to learn that, but that's just how science goes sometimes. Then there's conversion therapy, which is taking what appears to be science to a whole new dark place. This is sometimes called reparative therapy. This is a treatment that is intended to change a person's sexuality from being a homosexual into a heterosexual. Now this has a lot of, you know, deep religious connections. But when we actually look at the science of sexuality, what we see is that it's largely determined, well before you're born, and it cannot be changed. But despite the evidence, despite the science that we've done on human sexuality, this kind of, sexuality reassignment, however you want to describe it, it's still being practiced. Conversion therapy is not banned in most states in the United States. I'm not going to name names, but you could probably figure it out. You're a perfectly smart person. I'm sure you can guess correctly which states still practice this kind of stuff. But yeah, conversion therapy just simply doesn't work. And they use a lot of techniques that are clearly very harmful. Just to name a few of the techniques that they have used, things like a ice pick lobotomy, which is exactly what it sounds like. They stick an ice pick into your brain and they destroy the brain. Various prayer methods, using group pressure, like peer pressure, to get a person to conform. Various methods of chemical castration, like ingesting various hormones to make the person not interested in sex anymore. Or the conditioning of nausea-inducing drugs with homoerotic stimuli. Have you ever seen the Clockwork Orange movie? Just think of that. Forcing a person to watch this, homosexual stuff while giving them medications to make them nauseous. It's pretty horrendous, the kind of techniques these people use. It's quite obviously a form of torture. And because of how horrendous these methods can be, a lot of homosexuals who go through conversion therapy, they will say that they're cured. They will claim to be heterosexual simply because they don't want to be hurt anymore. They want to, get on with their life. But not all pseudosciences are so horrendous. Some of them seem relatively benign, and it's really hard sometimes to tell what is a pseudoscience and what isn't, and what the potential for harm might be. So just in general, the next time you hear somebody talk about some truth or scientific fact, just ask yourself the following question. Where's the supporting evidence for this? And then follow that up with doing a little bit of homework. Do a little bit of research, independent research, and see if you can verify these kinds of claims. But you might be wondering, why are there so many? Because they're everywhere. It's impossible to avoid being exposed to these kinds of things. And there's three explanations. There's three reasons why pseudosciences are so common. The first one is uncritical acceptance. This refers to our tendency to believe pleasant things about ourselves. If you open up a fortune cookie and it says that you are a brilliant person who will get married soon to the love of your life, why would you want to argue about that? That sounds very nice. I want to believe that. Why wouldn't I want to believe that? So when people are being optimistic like this, when they're telling you nice things about yourself, just take that with a little bit of skepticism. Maybe they're trying to get you to buy into something. Another one is confirmation bias, which refers to this tendency for us to notice and remember information that confirms our expectations and ignore discrepancies. So once again, you can see this everywhere, but I think a really concrete example would be racism. When it comes to racism, people expect individuals of a particular race to act in certain ways. And when they do, they say, oh, yeah, those people are like that. But if they don't act that way, if they act like a normal person, like they are, they just kind of ignore it. It's like they're just waiting for a chance to jump all over that person. They're waiting for that person to make that one particular behavior that they're looking for just so they can point the finger. So yeah, that's what confirmation bias is like. Is we just don't pay attention to stuff we don't want to see. And then the third one would be the Barnum effect, which is this tendency to consider personal descriptions accurate if they're stated generally. So this is something that I like to call the horoscope effect, because this has been masterfully employed by astrology over the years. You know, when you, I don't know if you, follow astrology. I don't know if you ever read your horoscope, but go pick one up sometime and just pick a random sign. I don't know what sign you happen to be. It doesn't matter. Just pick a random sign and read it out loud. Does that sound like you? Does that sound like something that applies to you? The answer is yes. All horoscopes apply to you because they're written in such a broad way that they could apply to anyone.